particular microphone that opens up, and it happened to me the other day, and
Hmm.
it was
That's okay. I'll mess with it later. I know it's. I did it before. There's just something in the settings I have to change. I don't know why.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
can
on
hear
the
it.
screen actually.
Yeah.
On your screen,
I. Uh huh.
you just tap on your screen. Just the same screen that you tap on your phone.
Yeah.
Some A speaker will open up on the periphery of the
No,
mic.
it's not though. Let me see. Hold on. Let me try it on this screen here. Maybe. Hold. Wait. I might have found it. Yeah. I don't know. I know I did it before. All right. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to mess with it too much. I'll just deal with it for today, and then I'll figure out the settings, inshallah.
All right.
Thank you, because it's not coming up. But I can hear you though. So how's everyone doing today? Everyone okay? Alhamdulillah. You guys ready for some?
So did you start your new job?
No, I've been just doing the onboarding stuff, filling out all the paperwork, and I
Okay.
had to go for the drug test and all that stuff. So that's why I've been a little bit busy the last couple of days doing all that stuff. But I'm supposed to start either, I think, Tuesday. I have to call them tomorrow to double check, but I think Tuesday. And I'll still be keeping my other job too at the same time. So I'll be basically working both. But my other job is a little bit more flexible, so it's easier to work around, um, because you can pretty much pick the days, and the hours are different too. So the other job will be earlier in the day. So it should, inshallah, work out. So that should be
Yeah, yeah.
Tuesday.
It's always a good idea to keep the old job because you know car wash is a difficult job anyway. But anyway, I don't want to discourage.
No, no, it's okay. So, are you guys ready for some studying? I was about to say, are you ready for some football? All right, let me see here. Let me get my notes out. So, what I want to talk about today a little bit was a continuation of something we already talked about before, which was we talked about hikmah. If you remember, I think it was last week or the week before, we went into some details about the word hikmah and how it was used in different places in the Quran. So I want to present something today that I think is kind of interesting about this word, hikmah. And um, that is by looking at some of the places where, wa alaikum salam, someone, I was streaming on YouTube at the same time so we can record it. So I don't have to record it and then upload it, already be done. Um, so if you remember last time, just as a quick review, I mentioned that the word hikmah, we can classify it into like 6 different categories depending on how it's used, right? Just to help us understand. So we classified it into the verses where al-kitab wal hikmah are mentioned together. We classified it into verses where it specifically speaks about teaching al-kitab wal hikmah. We classified it into verses that talk about al-mulku wal hikmah, dominion and wisdom. We classified it into one verse that says ayatullahi wal hikmah, the signs of Allah wal hikmah, and we classified it into the verses where hikmah is mentioned by itself, which is only 6 times out of all the times that it's mentioned. So if you remember, hikmah is mentioned 20 times, right? But out of all those 20 times, only 6 times is it mentioned just by itself. Usually it's connected with something, either al kitab wal hikmah, al mulk wal hikmah, ayatullah wal hikmah. It's connected with something, usually. So, in examining the verses where it's used just by itself without it being connected to anything, I found, I think, some interesting points about hikmah that helps us to understand it more. So let's look at some of those places. So we'll start off with chapter 2, verses 268 and 269. And I think we'll notice something very interesting. By the way, before I forget, I plan on streaming at 2 again today, inshallah. Like I was saying before, I might not be able to do that all the time with my schedule now, but on the days that I can, I will try to still do that. Um, and if I can also, once I have my schedule more locked in this week, I might even try to switch it to another regular time. But we'll see. I don't know exactly what my schedule is going to be, but for now, I'm going to try to do it as much as I can. We're going to definitely try to keep our Discord class, and then I'll try to stream as much as I can. Uh, and I'll try to keep it as much as I can at 2. But if I can't, then we'll try to have another time, inshallah. Because I really miss you guys, inshallah. I miss doing it, even if we can't do it all the time. At least if we can do it, a few times throughout the week, that'll be good too. So chapter 2, verse 268 and 269. So verse 268, he says, الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء. الشيطان promises you poverty and he orders you بالفحشاء, with al-fahsha, with like evil, obscene actions. والله يعيدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم. And Allah promises you forgiveness from him and bounty, and Allah is wasi'un alim. Allah is expansive and knowing. And then in the next verse he says, يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. He gives wisdom, al-hikmah, to whomsoever he wills. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرٌ كَثِيرًا. And whoever has been given wisdom, al-hikmah, then he has been given abundant goodness. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And none remembers except for ulul albab, except for, they usually translate ulul albab as the people of understanding, but I'm going to explain this term in a little bit in a deeper way. But first, let's make a few observations. So this is one of the times that al-hikmah, or wisdom, is mentioned by itself. So let's make a few observations about this. So number one, the first observation is that if you look at the context, right, the whole context is about spending. Like, even if you go back to the previous verse before the one that we started with, which is 267, it's all about spending. He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu anfiqu min tayyibati ma kasabtum wa mimma akhrajna lakum min al-ard. He says, O you who have believed, spend min tayyibati ma razaqnakum. Spend from the good and the pure things that you have earned, right? So number one, this context starts off with saying, spend min tayyibati ma kasabtum, from the good and the pure things, which is a beautiful thought, because it's easy to spend from the things that you don't really care about, or from the things that you don't really want, right? It's easy for you to give those things. But he encourages us here to spend min tayyibati ma razaqnakum, from the pure, the good and the pure things. So don't just spend from the inferior things, but spend also from the pure things, right? The good things. And then he continues, he says, from what you have earned, وَمِمَّا أَخْرَجْنَا لَكُمْ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ, and from what we have brought out for you from the earth. Then he says, وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ, and don't aim for al-khabith, from it, the inferior or filthy from it, right? So don't just look to give just the inferior, give the best of what you have. And even if you think about this just on a deeper kind of philosophical level, and not just think about it as far as like material things, it's actually a really beautiful sentiment. It's basically telling us, like, always give the best of what you have. Don't give what's inferior of anything you do. Always try to give the best of what you have. وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ, and do not aim at al-khabith, the filthy or inferior from it. تُنْفِقُونَ, spending from that. وَلَسْتُمْ بِآخِذِيهِ إِلَّا أَن تُغْمِضُوا فِيهِ, and you would not take that thing unless you close your eyes, right? Don't give something that you yourself would not take, except if you weren't, I'm not even gonna look, just give it to me. Right? Don't take that, right? So again, it's kind of like, to put it in other words, it kind of reminds me of even what they say in Christianity, where they say, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. It's kind of basically the same thought. Don't give people inferior things that you yourself wouldn't want. Give them the best of what you have. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. And know that Allah is uh, ghani, he's free of all wants, and hamid, praiseworthy. Then he goes into the next verse, which is the verse that we originally started with. I just want to show the context. The next verse he says, "Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra." Ash-shaytan promises you poverty. But also, just like we're saying about this verse about spending, don't just think of poverty in wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah, thank you. I was just reading the comment on the live over here. He says, Ash-shaytan promises poverty, right? But don't just think of poverty as material, as poverty from material things. Shaitan, that negative energy that shaitan represents, promises you lack of things. And that's one of our main concerns. And that's one of the things that a lot of times causes us to do some of the things that we do, or to have the philosophy or the outlook that we have sometimes, or to be depressed or whatever it might be, is that negative energy that's promising us al-faqra. It's promising us to be impoverished. So I want you to think about al-faqr, which is often translated as poverty, as the feeling of being impoverished, like not just from material things, but just the feeling of lack. And actually, you can see this usage of this word in a couple other places in the Quran. So let me share those with you real quick. So if you look at this word poverty in the Quran in other places, so for example, like for example, when Musa went to Midian, right, and he helped the women draw the water, and then it says he turned to the shade and he made this supplication to Allah. But what did he say? He said, ثُمَّ تَوَلَّى إِلَى ظِلِّي. Then he turned to the shade. فَقَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي لِمَا أَنزَلْتَ إِلَيَّ مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَقِيرٌ. He said, my Lord, I am, like when they translate it, they say, I am in need. I am in need of whatever good you send down to me. But if you listen to the wording, the exact wording, it says, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. I am faqir of whatever good you send down to me. So literally he's saying, I am impoverished except for any good that you send down, right? So that kind of feeling of impoverishment is a good feeling, because you're looking at it as, I don't have anything if Allah doesn't send it down. But you see how the use of the word faqir, which is often translated as like a poor person or an impoverished person, is not just saying like literally like you don't have material things, but it's the feeling of, and yes, of course, Musa was in a situation where he probably, because he left a place and went to Midian, right? But he's using it in a context of meaning I am in need. That's why they translate it like that. And what supports that interpretation is if you look at another place in the Quran where he says, Ya ayyuhan nasu, and this is in 35:15. Sorry, I didn't give the verse number of the other one. That was 28:24. And this is in this next verse is in 35:15. So in 35:15 he says, Ya ayyuhan nasu antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. Wallahu huwal ghaniyyul hamid. So this is another verse that shows that meaning. He says, "O people, antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. You are al-fuqara. You are poor people towards Allah," right? So meaning, again, it's using the idea of poverty, not just in like not having those material things, but it's using it in the context of the feeling of complete need for Allah. And again, the way that we can tell that is it's addressing all people. Ya ayyuhan nasu antumul fuqara'u. All people. So regardless of what material wealth that you feel you have, you are still a faqir when it comes to Allah, right? So that's why I said in this verse that we're studying, which is 268, I want us to try to think about faqr or poverty on a deeper level, not just, well, I'm not, I have these material things, so I'm not poor, right? No, even if we have material things, the idea of poverty or lack of in the Quran could be expressive of that human feeling of need towards Allah. But here, because it's coming from shaitan, it could also be expressive of the feeling that we don't have things, even though Allah continues to bless us. And we can see that from the rest of the verse. He says, "Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra." A shaitan promises you poverty. وَيَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ, and he orders you with al-fahsha, to go beyond the bounds in evil things. وَاللَّهُ يَعِدُكُمْ مَغْفِرَةً مِنْهُ وَفَضْلًا, and Allah promises you forgiveness from him and bounty, right? So it's these opposite energies, the feeling of the lack of things that comes from shaitan, and the feeling that comes from Allah of forgiveness. But the word forgiveness again is powerful, because maghfirah, which comes from the root ghafara, means, in Arabic it means to cover something and to mend or fix something. So maghfirah, Allah is promising you maghfirah. He's promising you to fix you, to cover you, to mend you, right? Which is the opposite of what shaitan is promising, that you won't have anything. You'll be lacking things. But the things that you feel like you're lacking, even within yourself, even within your personality, even mentally, whatever it might be, Allah is promising you maghfirah, to forgive, to mend, to fix things. Wa fadla, and bounty. Wallahu wasi'un alim, and Allah is expansive and knowing. And then he continues, yu'til hikmata man yasha. So you see the context, right? It's all about spending, right? And poverty, and the feeling of poverty that comes from shaitan. And then the very next verse, he goes into saying he gives hikmah, translated as wisdom, to whomsoever he wills. And whoever al hikmah is given to, then that person, faqad utiya khayran kathira, then he has been given abundant goodness. So, what's the connection with hikmah in this particular context? And like, even if you continue reading to the next couple verses, in verse 270, وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ. Whatever you spend of any spending, or whatever vow you make of any vow, then Allah knows it, right? And then the next verse after that, 271, in tubadu sadaqati fani'immahi. If you openly manifest a sadaqat, then that is fani'immahi, then that is a beautiful thing. That is a good thing. How excellent a thing that is. Wa in tukhfuha wa tu'tuha al-fuqara'a. But if you conceal it and you give it to al-fuqara, to those in need, فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, then it is better for you. So you see how this verse, which is 269, comes in the middle of a context which speaks about al-hikmah. يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. So what's the connection in that context? There could be a few different things. I'm going to mention one particular perspective, but there could be a few. But I also want to point out a couple other things before I mention how I think it fits in the context. So number one, al hikmah, we learn from this verse, is a quality that he gives to anyone, right? So it's not restricted to a person of a particular age. It's not restricted to a person of a particular ethnic background. It's not restricted to a person of a particular religion, a particular language. Yu'til hikmata man yasha. He left it completely open and exclusive, or inclusive, not exclusive, inclusive, right? He gives wisdom to whoever, men yasha, whoever he wills. So anyone has the ability to obtain this. And then he says, وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And whoever has been given al-hikmah, then he has been given abundant goodness. So number one, in the previous verse, it was just said that shaitan promises us poverty or lack of things. And then he told us, whoever al-hikmah is given to has been given abundant goodness. So that's the number one connection that jumps out to me, is that al-hikmah, like, we think of being given things or having lack of things, as I was saying earlier, as material things. But here in this context, he's telling us this quality of wisdom is abundant goodness, is khayran kathiran. So if you've been given that, even if you don't feel like you have a lot of the material things, but still you have abundant goodness. So don't let shaitan convince you that you're poor or you're impoverished or you lack things. If you've been given these mental qualities of insight and wisdom and things of that nature. So that's one thing. But another aspect of that too is, um perhaps, and Allah knows best, I think of al hikmah, and when we go to the upcoming verses, I think this will support this even more, and also the Arabic meaning of the word al hikmah. If you go back to the root meaning hakama, um, hakama, the root hakama, so hikmah comes from the three-letter root hakama, ha kaf mim, or HKM if we're using English letters. So the root the root meaning of these letters, um, is al-man'u li islah. That's one way to think about them. And this is the definition given by Al-Raghib al-Asfahani. I don't know if that was his exact wording. He may have added something in there. I might not have it exactly, but that was the general idea of what he said was al-man'u li islah. That hakama means to prevent something for the purpose of correction and fixing it. To prevent something for the purpose of correction and fixing it. Al-man'u li islah. And where we get this meaning from in Arabic is, we use a term in Arabic which is hakamah, with ta marbuta at the end. So Hakamah, hakamah, right? And what that means is, hakama is a bridle. So like when you put a bridle on like a horse or or an animal that helps to control it, direct it, to steer it, that's where we get this meaning from in Arabic for this three-letter root hakama, which is explained as al-man'u li islah, to prevent something in order to fix it and correct it. And that makes sense, because if you bridle like a horse or an animal, then you'll be able to steer it, you'll be able to train it, stuff like that. So from that meaning, al-hikmah has a preventative quality to it, where it prevents you from doing bad things. It steers you, it corrects you. It has a corrective, preventative quality to it. So from studying the different verses that al hikmah is mentioned in, especially the ones where it's mentioned by itself, which we're going to go to them in a second, the other ones, um, Allah knows best, but personally, my conclusion is, I think the idea of al hikmah from a Quranic standpoint is more focused on an understanding of knowing how to avoid bad things, knowing how to avoid pitfalls, more so than it is when we usually think of wisdom. When people usually talk about wisdom, they usually talk about it in terms of like someone giving wise advice, for example, or someone having wise words, which could be part of it. I'm not saying that's not part of it, but I think from the Arabic meaning and from the context of the verses, I think al hikmah Quranically is more focused, maybe like 80% more. I'm just that's just a number that I made up just to give an idea of what I'm trying to say. So I'm not saying literally like 80%, but like a large percentage more focused on avoiding the bad, right? And that's what true wisdom is. Because um when you look at just life in general, when it comes to doing good things, right? There's so many different good things that you can do, and sometimes it's hard. That's what makes decision making difficult. Is sometimes you can see a bunch of different good things to do in this, whatever it is that you're looking at in this particular scenario. There's all these different good things that you can do, and deciding amongst them is difficult because they're all good. So sometimes it's hard to know for sure what is the best thing to do or what is a good thing to do, but it's a lot easier to know what's not a good thing to do. And I think that's where wisdom comes into play. Is not so much just knowing the good things, but understanding what the bad thing is. So you can look at these different options and you can say, well, all these different options are good. And I can see that they're all good. And it's hard for me to judge which one is the best option. But sometimes I can look at one particular option and I can say, I know for sure that one is not the option. So this is a way of thinking that kind of like reverses, like philosophically, how a lot of us have been trained to think, where we're trained to think to look for what is the good thing, right? But then, like I said, that's when our decision making kind of gets cloudy. So the reversal of that is, instead of always trying to find what is the good thing, try to first eliminate what you know for sure is the bad thing. And that's wisdom. Like, you know for sure this is not the thing you should do. And then after that, it's pretty much open to say, well, then I could do any one of these things because I know this is the bad thing. And this is a thought process that one philosopher called via negativa, which literally means the negative way. It's a Latin term that literally means the negative way. And the negative way doesn't mean to be negative, right? Because that's what we usually associate that term with. It means to look for the things that you can eliminate as options and to know like this thing is not the thing. So the reason I mention all that in this context is because, again, when you look here, it's about having wisdom related to something negative, which is shaitan. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra. And then the very next verse, he says, yu'til hikmata man yasha. He gives wisdom to whomsoever he wills. So he gives this understanding of the negative energy where you can distinguish that and say, I know this feeling of poverty is not real. This is something that shaitan is bringing up. I know this feeling of lack is not something coming from Allah. Like, that's true wisdom, to be able to live life with that kind of an understanding, right? And I think that's something that's applicable on a daily basis, because I know we all go through that. I go through that personally, where you might look at what someone else has, or you might look at things that you're trying to do and feel like you're not where you want to be. So you start having that feeling of lack or being behind or stuff like that. But those are shaitan kind of feelings, right? And so that's why perhaps one of the reasons he says, yu'til hikmata man yasha. He gives wisdom, because that's wisdom, right? It's wisdom to be able to look at not what you don't have, but to have understanding of how Allah has blessed us. Go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody was about to say something. And that's maybe why in the very next, not in the very next verse, but in the rest of the verse, he, or no, it's in the previous verse. Sorry, that's why in the rest of that previous verse he says, "Wallahu ya'idukum maghfiratan minhu wa fadla." Allah promises you forgiveness from Him and bounty, as a reminder that that feeling is from shaitan, and we should always bring our attention back to the forgiveness that comes from Allah and the bounty that comes from Allah. And that's where true wisdom lies. And then he says, يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. He gives al-hikmah to whomsoever he wills. And again, remember that meaning, hakamatu daba, the bridle that an animal has that you can control it and steer it with, right? So in this context where shaitan is trying to draw you into that thought process of not having things, al-hikmah is that steering quality that brings you back. And then he says at the end of the verse, وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And none remembers or takes admonition except ulul albab, except those who possess albab. So albab is the plural of the word lub. So the word lub means like the essence of something. So I think that's also really interesting here, because ulul albab, they usually translate it as people of intellect. But in the Quran, there's different words that could be used for people of intellect or things of that nature. Like ulil nuha is one, al aql is one. There's different words. So each one of them, they don't mean the same thing, right? Even if they're referring to a very similar quality that has overlap, but they're also different. They also give different connotations. So I would say Allah knows best here. Ulul albab, those who possess albab, which is the plural of the word lub, means those who possess the ability to see the essence of things. And again, putting that in the verse with al hikmah, wisdom, opens up another dimension of what al hikmah is. Al hikmah is the quality that gives you the ability to see the essence of something and not just see the surface of it. And that's another beautiful meaning we can get potentially from this verse, because if you think about all of the verses where al kitab wal hikmah were put together, right? Why were they put together so much? I think 10 times, if I recall correctly, they were put together in the same verse. Let me look at my notes again. I think it was 10 times. Yep. 10 times Al Kitab wal Hikmah was put together. Why? Maybe because, and Allah knows best, Al Kitab potentially refers to the law. So when you look at the word kitab from kataba and you look at the various words or the various contexts where that's used in, for example, kutiba alaykumus siyam. As-siyam or fasting was kutiba alaykum, was literally like written upon you, but like prescribed upon you. So kutiba kataba and various wordings could mean or have to do with prescribing something, ordaining something like a law, right? So like different laws that are put into effect is like a kitab. So why is al kitabu wal hikmah mentioned together 10 times? Well, perhaps this verse illuminates that, because at the end of this verse, he says, none remembers except for ulul albab, those people who possess albab. They possess the ability to see the essence of something. So if you have al kitab by itself, you have the laws by itself, and you don't see the essence of the laws and what the laws are really there for, then you get kind of stuck into this like legalism and this technicality, these technicalities where you just apply the law blindly without consideration of like circumstances and uh, the people that are involved, and the deeper wisdoms that underlie the law, etc. Right? But also, if you just have al hikmah seems to be a quality that should be connected to something, because most of the time that it's mentioned with something. Al kitab wal hikmah, al mulk wal hikmah, ayatullahi wal hikmah, for example, right? It's only 6 times that it's mentioned by itself. So perhaps there's this interplay between both of them, that al hikmah, you have wisdom about something, right? Because it's connected to something. But also, you don't want to just have like al kitab without wisdom, or al mulk without wisdom, or ayatullahi without wisdom, because al hikmah gives you the ability to see the essence of something, and Allah knows best. So this is one place where al hikmah is mentioned by itself. Another place that I want to look at is chapter 17, verse 39. But I also want to look at the context before that. So chapter 17, verse 39, and then we're going to look before that. So the context before that, there's a lot in it. So I don't necessarily want to read every single verse, like the whole verse, but I just want to give you kind of a summary of what's in the verses before it. And then if you want to go back and read all the verses on your own, that's good too. So if we start from about verse 23, so verse 39 is the verse that's going to mention al-hikmah by itself. But if we go back to verse 23, we'll see something interesting. Now, keep in mind what I said from the previous verse about al-hikmah is that it seems to be connected to knowing like the bad, knowing how to avoid certain bad things, and not just about knowing the good things. Now, look at how this context supports that. He says here, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And your Lord has prescribed that you do not worship except him, and you do goodness to parents. Then he talks about them reaching old age, but I just want to skip a little bit because I want to give you some of the context. He says, فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. Do not say to them. I want you to notice in these verses that we're going to read up to verse 39, how many times he says, don't do something, right? Yes, there are a certain amount of times that he says to do something. So that's why I said I'm not saying completely al-hikmah is only knowing uh, and understanding the bad. But if you look at the context, it seems to be a large focus of al-hikmah is the understanding of how of what bad things to avoid. So he says, do not say to them uf, wala tanharhuma, and do not rebuke them. And then if we go to verse 26, he's talking about here about spending. So he says, وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَى حَقَّهُ وَالْمِسْكِينَ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا. And he says, and give the near relatives their right, and the poor and the traveler. وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا. And don't be wasteful, basically. But this word, وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا, where this word comes from in Arabic, al-badr, means to like scatter. Like if you take a handful of seeds and you just throw them, like with no method, right? You're not planting them in certain rows. You just throw them into the dirt. That's what tabdir is, badr, right? Um, so wala tubadir tabdira. So like don't spend like squandering, don't squander it. But on a deeper level, if we read the next verse, this idea of just throwing seeds and scattering them without any method, it makes a lot more sense with the following verse. So he says, give them their right. وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا. Don't do tabdir. إِنَّ الْمُبَذِّرِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ. He says, al-mubadhirin are the brothers of ash-shayateen, are the brothers of the devils. So they probably translate this something like those who squander or spendthrifts, I think they say, are the brothers of the devils. But why? Why are they the brothers of the devils? So if you think about this, like, and there could be various different reasons, obviously, right? But one thing that occurs to me is if you think about the Arabic meaning of tabdhir, which is to scatter, just to throw some seeds and scatter them. I think one way to look at this is uh, that's an energy that's chaotic and it has no method. It's not methodical. It's not calculated. It's not with knowledge. Like you're not planning it with the knowledge of, what's the best way for me to plant this? What's the best soil, for this thing, this particular seed that I'm planting? You're just throwing the seeds without any method or without any forethought. So perhaps that's why he's saying that they are ikhwan al-shayateen, that the mubadhirin, those who do that, those who spend in that fashion, are the brothers of the devils, because the devils represent a chaotic, disorganized energy, right? That just throw things anywhere without any method or without any forethought. So, contrary to that, from a Quranic standpoint, how we live life and how we should try to think about things is more methodical, more thought out, more calculated. And sometimes people use the word calculated in a bad way. So I don't mean in a bad way, like where sometimes people use that in a Machiavellian sense, where they're calculated trying to manipulate people. I don't mean like that. I mean calculated in the sense of we are planning the moves that we're going to make, whether that's, talking about a job or we're talking about whatever undertaking we're talking about. The energy that we want to have is an organized energy that helps us to accomplish things. But a shayateen have a disorganized, chaotic energy, right? And that's perhaps why he says, Innal mubadhirina kanu ikhwana shayateen. I don't want to say why, but one of the wisdoms that we can draw from that, because there could be many reasons why he says that those who do tabdhir, those who just squander and scatter things, are the brothers of a shayateen. So here's another place where he says, do not do this. وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا. Then if we skip to verse 29, he's talking about spending again. And he says, ولا تجعل يدك مغلولة إلى عنقك ولا تبسطها كل البسط. He says, and don't make your hand, excuse me, your hand tied to your neck, nor nor extend it completely. So have a middle ground when you spend, right? When you give, and again, we don't just want to think about this in like in a material way, but just anything you give, whether that's your time, your part of yourself, your attention. Don't make your hand tied to your neck. So don't just completely withhold everything, right? And then he says, "Wala tabsutha," but don't extend it kull al-basti, completely, complete extension. So don't fully extend it, but don't withhold it. Be somewhere in the middle. And then verse 31, he says, "Wala taqtulu awladakum khashyata imlaq," and do not kill your children out of fear of poverty. In verse 32, "Wala taqrabu zina," and do not approach a zina. In verse 33, "Wala taqtulu nafsa allati harrama Allahu illa bilhaq," and do not kill a soul that Allah has made sacred or forbidden except with just cause. In verse 34, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and do not approach the wealth of the orphan except with that which is most beautiful. Verse 36, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ, and do not follow what you don't have knowledge about. Verse 37, وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا, do not walk in the earth in self-importance. So you see, now I skipped through, so there are parts in those verses that are telling us specifically to do things, right? Like وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ إِذَا كِلْتُمْ, fulfill the measuring when you measure. But I just wanted to skip through to show how many times in this section of verses that he tells us, do not do this and do not do that. And then he ends verse 38 by saying, كُلُّ ذَلِكَ كَانَ سَيِّئُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ مَكْرُوهًا. All of that, it's evil. كَانَ سَيِّئُهُ. All of that, it's evil. So the context is focused on what? The bad, more so, right? That's my point of reading this, just to show that the context, as evidenced by the verse that kind of concludes it, which is verse 38, is more focused on the bad than the good, even though there are good things in it, but it's more focused on the bad. كل ذلك كان سيئه عند ربك مكروها. All of that, it's evil with your Lord, is makruhan, is hated or disliked. Now, after reading all of that, go to verse 39. ذلك مما أوحى إليك ربك من الحكمة. That is what your Lord inspired you of, al-hikmah, of wisdom. So you see, that's why I said when we think about al-hikmah, I think more so, like the higher percentage is al-hikmah is the understanding and the judgment and the wisdom to avoid what's bad, more so than it is just to know what's good or to like have very wise advice, even though that does play into it. So I'm not saying that it's not there at all, but you notice this whole context mainly, as evidenced by the very last verse in the context, kullu dhalika kana sayyi'uhu, all of that, it's evil, is hated in the sight of your Lord, is more heavily focused on the bad or what you don't do. And he ends that by saying that is part of the wisdom that your Lord has inspired you. Another verse that I want to look at is 54, chapter 54, verse 4 and 5. This is Surah Al-Qamar, chapter 54, verse 4 and 5. So chapter 54, verse 4 and 5, he says, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّنَ الْأَنْبَاءِ مَا فِيهِ مُزْدَجَرٌ. He says, there has come to them, and truly there has come to them, min al-anba'i, of various forms of news or information, ma fihi muzdajar, that which there is in it, muzdajar, something that will rebuke you or censor you or do zajar, like to I'm trying to think of the exact Arabic way that they explain it. It's really interesting. Zajar is like when you when you make a camel go. This is how they explain it in Arabic, like by using your voice. So you're like, I don't know, I never made a camel go, so I can only use the analogy of like how I think of that would work, like with a dog or something. You're like, go on, get out of here, right? Hey, stop, go, get out of here, right? That's like zajar. So it's like a rebuke, but it's like making you like deterring you from something or moving you on from something by using your voice, right? So he says, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّنَ الْأَنبَاءِ مَا فِيهِ مُزْدَجَرٌ. There has come to you of different news, min al anba'i, that which in that information or news is muzdajar, is things that will like deter you or rebuke you or make you move away from certain things. Then verse 5 he says, hikmatun balighatun, far reaching wisdom. Look at how beautiful that is. In the context, again, where he's talking about something that will rebuke you or move you away from things, he calls that hikmatun baligha, far-reaching wisdom, not just wisdom, far-reaching wisdom. And this is the only verse that I'm aware of, at least, or that I could find, that classifies hikmah as baligha, that classifies wisdom as far-reaching, and that's in the context of information that will deter you or rebuke you or push you away. And Surah Al-Qamar as a whole is focused a lot on warning. So if you keep reading, even right after this in the verse, he says, Hikmatun balighatun fama tughnin nudhur. Far-reaching wisdom, but the warners did not benefit. So when the warners came to people, it didn't deter them, right? So that's in the context of saying hikmatun baligha. So if warning from bad things doesn't deter us, is that truly wisdom, right? And if you keep reading in this surah, right, there's the focus on warning uh, is many times in this surah. So, for example, if you look at verse 16, he says, فَكَيْفَ كَانَ عَذَابِي وَالنُّذُرِ. So how was my punishment and my warning? Verse 18, فَكَيْفَ كَانَ عَذَابِي وَالنُّذُرِ. Same phrase. Verse 21, فَكَيْفَ كَانَ عَذَابِي وَالنُّذُرِ. How was my punishment and my warning? Verse 23, كَذَّبَتْ ثَمُودُ بِالنُّذُرِ. Thamud denied the warners. Um, verse 30, فَكَيْفَ كَانَ عَذَابِي وَنُذُرِ. Same phrase. How was my punishment and my warning? Verse 33, كَذَّبَتْ قَوْمُ لُوطٍ بِالنُّذُرِ. The people of Lut denied the warners. Um, verse 36, وَلَقَدْ أَنذَرَهُمْ. He warned them, right? بطشتنا, he warned them of our seizing. فَتَمَارَوْا بِالنُّذُرِ. So they argued or debated with the warners. The end of verse 37, فَذُوقُوا عَذَابِي وَنُذُرِ. So taste my punishment and my warning. Verse 39, فَذُوقُوا عَذَابِي وَنُذُرِ. So taste my punishment and my warning. Verse 41, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَ آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ النُّذُرِ. There came warners to the followers of Fir'aun, right? So when you look at the surah as a whole, look at how many times out of 55 verses that the idea of warning is mentioned in this surah. And this is the surah which is the only place that says hikmatun baligha, far-reaching wisdom. So from these three places in the Quran, chapter 2, 268 and 269, chapter 1739 in the preceding context, and here, chapter 54, verse 4 and 5, in the context of the surah as a whole. From these three places, I would conclude, and Allah knows best, that the concept of hikmah is more a quality that is a quality of self-control and direction away from things that harm you, more so than it is just telling you what's good, even though that's a part of it, we can also see that, right? But maybe like I said 80%, but that's not like a real statistical number that I have. But I'm just trying to show you how I'm thinking about like the higher percentage is towards hikmah being directing you away from and steering you away from things that will harm you more so than just things that will benefit you. And Allah knows best. So that's the class for today. If anybody has anything they want to add, oh, before I say that though, because I see Hannah popped in, I want to say what I said in the beginning. Inshallah, I will be streaming at 2 today for our regular live stream. If you can make it, if you're busy, or you can't make it, I totally understand. But I wanted to tell you, um, I'm gonna, like I was saying in the beginning. Go ahead, say what did you say?
Because I got a thingy notification saying that you were going to stream at 8 p.m. my time.
8
That's
p.m.
the invite. So when I saw yesterday it said 11 a.m., I thought, oh, that was going to be your workout class. So I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I don't know why you got why. Yeah, I don't know why that
If
happened like
you
that.
look at you put it as a schedule. So the scheduled classes all say 8 p.m.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I need to fix that. You're right. But yeah, that's okay. Because I know it's been a little haphazard. I've been a little bit busy the last few days. And we haven't been doing it
I want to
regular.
say huge congratulations.
Yeah, inshallah, alhamdulillah. Um, but I still want to try to keep streaming, but it might not necessarily once I get my schedule this week and I know for sure what my schedule is, because now it's the last few days have been I had to do a drug test for the job, so I had to do that, and then one of the kids got me sick. I don't know if you can hear it. They got sick. Now I'm sick.
Well,
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's not too bad, but I just feel like drained. And then I had to work yesterday, like 10 hours because we had a special event at my job, so they wanted me to come in early. So it's just been a little off, but I definitely want to keep streaming because I think that's a beneficial thing that we're doing. I don't know for sure if it will be at the same time or if it will even be able to be every day. But even if we can only do it a few times a week, I think anything that we can do where we get together and study the Quran is a benefit. It benefits all of us. It definitely benefits me. It's definitely something I don't want to stop
Definitely.
doing. Go ahead.
We appreciate what you do more than we can even express.
Alhamdulillah.
Like time that you can manage to stream is so, we appreciate it so much.
Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, I appreciate you saying that. I definitely want to do that, man. So it's just kind of working around this new schedule and kind of figuring out um, how that's going to work out. I don't know, it might work out around the same time. I'm not 100% sure. But whatever the case, like I said, that's why I stream this class on YouTube at the same time. So that way, whoever missed this class, so even though you came late, the whole class will be available on YouTube. So you can yeah, you can check that out. So I just wanted to say that before we finish our class that inshallah I will be streaming at 2. I'm off of everything today. I'm a little under the weather, but I think I can make it. Inshallah.
Oh, I'll feel better. Have some chicken soup. Once there, ready with the mute button.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. Be ready. I actually had some chicken soup this morning. My wife made me some chicken soup. So
It's the best.
yeah, that actually helped me feel better. I slept in a little bit this morning. Because I usually on Sunday morning I also usually have a one-on-one class with this one Muslim brother, and I had to tell him like, man, I can't this morning because we usually have it at 8 my time. So I was like, man, I got to get some sleep because I didn't even get off work until 1:30 last night, and I was like, yeah, I gotta sleep in. So I slept in. I ate some chicken soup. I feel a lot better. Go out and get some sun in a minute when we get done with this class. And I think as the day goes on, I think it's not really too bad. It's more just like the sniffles and just feeling a little fatigued. So inshallah, this actually, believe it or not, this made me feel even a lot better. I don't know, like uh, just something about like teaching the Quran and talking about the Quran, man. It just really lifts. Inshallah, thank you. It just really it just really lifts my spirits, man. So I appreciate you guys doing this with me because it definitely helps me.
I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
You know, like at the beginning where it was when you mentioned to
Yes.
It talks about how what Satan promises us and then how Allah is like the limitless source.
Hmm.
Can it link to like some of the names of Allah Al-Ghani? So like when
Hmm.
we think about like whatever things we're going through, like our thought process throughout the day or whatever, could you say like Satan is the lower consciousness and then the higher consciousness and we have to kind of continuously like derive from Allah Al-Ghani, so we find the Al-Ghani in like the abundance in it. Where it will kind of like be a vessel of whatever name Allah gives. I don't know, I thought about that and wondered what you thought.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like that because I think actually now that you mention that, let me look. But I think that's actually in one of the verses that I quoted. I don't. Yeah, it is. I didn't read the whole verse. I read the beginning of it, so that's a good point. So the verse again is 35:15, and it says, "Ya yuhannasu antumul fuqara'u ila Allah, wallahu huwal ghaniyyul hamid." It says, "O people, you are al fuqara to Allah. You are in need of Allah, and Allah, huwal ghani al hamid. He is al ghani. He is the one rich or free of wants, and al hamid." Um, and I think, yep, I thought so. That's also in another verse. He says in 47:38, he says, "Woman yabkhal فإنما يبخل عن نفسه." And whoever is stingy, then he's only stingy from his own self. Wallahu al-ghaniyu wa antumul fuqara. And Allah is al-ghani, and you are al-fuqara. You are poor or in need of. Allah's al-ghani. So yeah, I like that. That's a really nice point. The idea that having the ghina, the the sufficiency and richness of Allah and being conscious of that is uh is kind of something that helps to direct our thoughts in the context of feeling like impoverished or lack of, just the remembering that Allah's al-ghani. Yeah, I like that point. That's nice. Thank you for mentioning that.
No worries. I don't know. I'm gonna say this because it might help someone, but when I think about it, because sometimes like I have like a lot of anxiety or like I overthink a lot of things or like I'm always stuck in the past. So the way I kind of found the Quran was if you think like if you wake up in the morning, think of yourself as a like an empty vessel and only fill it with the names of Allah that you can embody that day, and then that way you can maybe try and control like the waswas or like your thoughts that may not benefit you, and then fill it with things that if you know anchor yourself in God's name, and that was really helpful. So I just wanted to say that would help anyone else.
SubhanAllah. No, that's nice. I want to actually repeat it because I'm not sure on YouTube if they can how well they can hear the audio, but that's really actually beautiful. So basically to summarize, she was saying when you wake up in the morning, like filling your mind with like the names of Allah that you need particularly for that day. Like, so if it's Al-Ghani, if it's Al-Ghafur, whatever it might be. So like that's a way of like controlling your consciousness instead of overthinking things or like succumbing to like anxiety and stuff like that. It's almost kind of like what I'm getting from you. At least this is how I'm taking it. It's almost like a meditation, you know, where you're meditating on those particular names that are going to impact your life for that particular day. And you're kind of like starting your day off with like, as you described it, like filling your mind with that. I think that's really beautiful. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. So if there's nothing else, is there anything else before we close? No? Okay, that's good. That's good because we got about 2 hours before our next stream, inshallah, and I'll go get myself together, take the dog for a walk. And
Sure, man.
further.
Really do. Really do.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Thank you.
Sunday.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. Oh, Asma over here said that's beautiful. Thanks to the sister for mentioning that. So see, you are benefiting other people. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. Hope you
Alhamdulillah.
get well soon. Have lots of ginger and lemon.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Okay, Assalamu alaikum. I see you guys at 2. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Rose sent me a message, so I forgot I was still streaming. I'm glad you guys are still with me though. So what we're trying to do is, that's what she sent me the message about, and I forgot. Is we're gonna start in our Discord class. We're gonna start journaling, like communal journaling. So what we're gonna do is, she developed all these different prompts, and we're gonna, like, each week give the group a prompt and like have them, like 20 minutes of journaling throughout the week, and then we'll share it on our Sunday class. If you want to share it, you don't have to share it. So yeah, that's what she was reminding me to mention it, and I forgot. So what I'll do is I'll send a message to the whole group. But I appreciate you guys being here. We'll be here again in 2 hours, inshallah. And we'll stream on TikTok and YouTube at the same time. Hope to see you. Assalamu alaikum.